what I want us to be able to do also is to think about, is what I call donut knowledge. See, it's what is not there can be just as important to us as what is there. Because remember when we talked about this whole dynamic of concealment, we said that concealment is the easiest form of deception, and that most interviewers will miss deception by concealment, and the fact that anytime someone is deceiving us by concealment, then everything they are telling us is the truth. It's just not the whole truth. And so in my not only my review of my notes, but in my typing of my notes, I want to think about what is it that isn't there. What I like to do is to read that hard copy. I don't read over the hard copy. I read through the hard copy. Reading over something is one thing. Reading through it is something entirely different. And so as I read through this, I want to identify quotations that may be in there. I want to identify what may be solid or salient bits of information. And even more important, as important as it is to look at quotations and to look at these definitive facts, I like to look at what are known as an aside. Now, an aside is when someone will give you, they'll step out of their conversation and they'll give you what seems to be a bit of superfluous information, information that's not really necessary. But asides can be some of the most critical types of information. And many times if you look over your notes or the notes of other people, you'll see in there asides, which for our purposes are some of the ingredients that can add to this investigative meal. Because an aside is either going to be one of two things. It's either going to be semantic, which are the individual is going to relate some fact that in their mind relates to this whole situation, or it is going to be episodic, where the individual will give you a story or an illustration that is, in their mind, is related to this. The interview itself is not an isolated event. It's part of the entire inquiry dynamic. It flows with that inquiry. It can change the direction of the inquiry, and it can loop back around. So this is what I call the interview flow dynamic, and these PowerPoints ultimately may assist you as you go into the future. Now, when I get ready to sit down and conduct an interview, I think about all the information that I have, and I give it a score of 1, which means very little, up to 99, which means I know almost everything. I really don't believe that we know everything, but I've included some dynamics out here, the background, previous interviews, surveillance, but I want to add one of the things that I look very closely at are not only my own notes, but the notes of other people that have conducted interviews that are leading up to me conducting this interview with this individual here. And so in addition to background, previous notes, documentation, surveillance, I'm sure each and every one of you can think of other things that you would like to have. But one of the things that I do this for is because it makes me to think about the information that I have. And while you and I may look at the same information and draw two entirely different numbers on there, nevertheless, whatever numerical letter you give that's going to work for you. And then, and I use this a lot when I used to have to assign people to go do interviews, but I do this with myself too. I want to give myself or the individual that I'm assigned to go conduct that interview, I'm going to rank that individual somewhere between 1, which is just a neophyte that just walked into the door, to a 99, which is, here's an individual that is, they're good, they're very good, but they're striving to be better. And I look at the individual's KSA, their knowledge, skill, and ability, what training they've had. Are there external forces that are playing on this inquiry that could impact into the interview itself? And the other thing is, how much self-control does this individual have? These two scores better add up to 100, because if the ability level of the interviewer is low and the information available is low, then the gap between those two lines is the probability for a negative outcome in that interview. And so one of the things I want us to think about is that with adequate note-taking and utilization, we can increase that level of information that we know by perhaps looking at our notes a little bit deeper, or with perhaps a slightly different perspective than most people do. I believe, and I've seen this happen time and time again, that the utilization of those notes can proportionally enhance the probability of a positive outcome, both in the interview and in the investigation itself. We can conceptualize this whole dynamic in a number of ways. And this one that I've got on the screen here is pretty traditional, is that I've interviewed subject number 1, subject number 2, and subject number 3. This has led me to the target of this inquiry. And if everything was always just simply cut and dried, then this would always work for me. But cases aren't always that simple. And in some cases, I like to think of, to conceptualize this whole process rather than just something that's linear, then maybe my thought process will be a little more, I would say, synergistic, if I can think of this more as a matrix. And this is where I think the whole dynamic of a case management system will allow us to, in a sense, take a higher look at this, be able to search the verbs, search the pronouns, search the modifiers, and other dynamic information that is relevant to whatever this may be. And it may be that a piece of information that I get from the subject in the upper left-hand corner tied with a piece of information that I get from the subject in the lower right-hand corner, that this is exactly what I need in order to bring this case to resolution and to move forward.